Hey guys, here is the Motorola 12K2 I picked up in Cincinnati, Ohio a while back. It had been quarantined on the back porch for over a year because there was quite a bit of evidence of insect damage, and I was worried that they might come back and infest my other sets. But luckily there has been no evidence of any new insect activity, so I brought it inside finally. I have never pulled the chassis on this or checked the picture tube or anything like that. I do have some other sets that I'm going to need to refinish and do some repairs in the cabinet. And I figured this would be a great cabinet to test out some new products on. I only paid 20 bucks for this set. And with all the insect damage and so on, it's not really worth a whole lot. And so I figured this would be a great candidate to test some new products. One is for patching in all these insect holes and damage and so on. Another is for filling in grain. You need to do that on open pored woods like mahogany and walnut. When I strip this down, I'm going to end up with kind of an open pored wood surface. The grain filler will fill in those pores and make a nice smooth surface, so we'll see how that goes. Probably the biggest challenge is actually going to be reproducing this effect along here. It's loose in some spots. Some sections are missing, although I do have at least this section here. That. But some sections, like over here, are completely gone, and worse yet, on this side, it's all gone. Looking closely, I can see that this is veneer, fairly thick veneer, that was cut such that the grain is running horizontally. So I do have some bits of veneer. If I can find a piece with the grain running the right way that's this wide, or maybe I'll make several sections, I figure I can carefully trace this pattern onto it and cut it out and then glue it on like I did originally. That's something I've never done anything quite like that before, so should be interesting to give it a try. Otherwise, I think it'll just be a matter of stripping this, sanding it down, patching in the holes, and then staining it and refinishing it. Here is a look at the back. This appears to be a custom cabinet made by Universal for Motorola. Back is long gone, but there's one little remnant of it here, I think, or maybe this was a connector for an antenna or something, not sure. There is actually a built-in internal antenna sitting down here in the bottom. Appears to be all intact from what I can see. It's stapled to the sides. And I guess that's it. There's nothing underneath it. There's no. So this is like the bottom of the set. There's a speaker. Looks to be in really good shape, all things considered. Oh, and it's a field coil speaker, so this must serve a dual role of filtering the power supply. Speaking of which, that's kind of unusual in this set. I've studied the schematic for it and discovered that this is kind of a hybrid set. A number of Motorola sets, especially the 7-inch sets, were transformerless. The filaments were series wired, and the high voltage or B+ supply was derived by rectifying and doubling the 120 volts AC in. Problem with those sets can be that if there's a power surge or the filaments don't burn evenly, in other words, some tubes conduct more than others, or they don't warm up evenly, you can burn tubes out. Worst of all being that you might burn out the picture tube. So what they did in this set is there's a little transformer. This is just for the tube filaments. And for the B plus supply, they still rectify the AC input. So what that effectively does is it cuts down the power requirements for the transformer by 50%, maybe more. So this transformer is far smaller than, for example, here's an Admiral chassis where they actually have 2 power transformers. One, I guess you call B++ and one for B+, and they're huge, and there's power chokes back there. So compare that to just this little guy and a field-coiled speaker. So an efficient design, but it does mean that there's potentially a hot chassis in this set. Basically all the tubes are gone. I guess I just have this one lone tube here and maybe one underneath. I'd noticed that before. There's a metal shield underneath where the chassis is. I believe the flyback, or sorry, the flyback and the high voltage rectifier are located somewhere underneath the chassis, whereas normally they're up on top. Oh, that's a shame. This may be an old repair attempt. This electrolytic is broken loose. Because the chassis is hot, ground is kind of floating around the set on a wire, and they insulate these electrolytic capacitors from the chassis with these insulating wafers, and this one's completely broken loose. Hopefully I can dig up a replacement or maybe glue it back together. This one seems to be okay, and the third one as well. Oh, I guess I have 2 tubes left in this set. Alright, so the 2 main things I want to accomplish. One is I'm still waiting on my refinishing supplies to arrive. Some stuff was back ordered. But in the meantime I can start stripping this cabinet. And 2, pull out the chassis and see what I'm actually dealing with. Here's a little tube chart on the side here. All those tubes are quite common, and I've got plenty on hand. It's a TS53 chassis. So I'll pull out my tube tester to, or I should say picture tube tester, to see if this picture tube's still good. If not, I do have 1 spare 12-inch picture tube. And 2, slide this chassis out and see what lies below. Here's a closer look at the picture tube. It's a 12LP4. It's a 12-inch black and white picture tube. This is the high voltage connector. If this set had been powered up anytime recently, like in the last week, I would be concerned that there might be a charge, because this picture tube acts like a giant capacitor. There's a high voltage conducting surface on the inside, and the outside is conductive and it's grounded, so conductor, glass, and then another conductor makes a capacitor. And there's around 10,000 volts or so on that, and this can actually hold a charge for days. So if you wanted to discharge it, a good way to do it is take a grounded clip onto the chassis, attach that to a screwdriver, and then slide it underneath this rubber cap until you touch the metal and make sure it's discharged. Like I said, this set hasn't been powered up in, I'm sure, years, so no problems there. This assembly is the yoke. You loosen up this thumb screw here, which allows you to slide it back and forth, and that's for adjusting the picture so it's level. It'll rock the picture left and right. This gigantic ring here is the focus coil, and you use this handle here to tilt it up and down, left and right, to center the picture. This crazy looking contraption here is the ion trap magnet. The gun in the CRT is bent because in spite of their best efforts, there's always a few molecules trapped inside of this vacuum tube, and if those accelerate and through the electron gun and hit the front of the picture tube, they can cause damage to the phosphor surface. So they shoot both the ions and the electrons off to the side, and this is actually a magnet, and it bends back only the electrons to the face of the CRT, and the ions shoot harmlessly off the side. And then here's the actual connection for the video signal and the filament. I've hooked up clip leads to my Suncor CR70, and let's see how that goes. Like I said, it's a 12LP4, so I've gone through and have these settings set up here. First, let's power it up and set the filament to be on that red line, which is 6.3 volts AC, which is a very common voltage for both tubes and picture tubes. And probably hard to see for you guys with the camera lights on, so I'll turn that off. Yep. Don't see any glow, so I'm going to go back and check all my connections. I had myself a little bit of a scare there. I couldn't get any filament glow, so I then pulled out my B&K 440 and had no filament glow, and I pulled out a multimeter to check for filament continuity. And at first I had infinity, then I started wiggling the base around, and I got some crazy readings going up and down, fluctuating. Then I hooked up the B&K 440 again and wiggled it around again, and finally got a bit of a glow coming out of it. So I think what I need to do is take this base off. Even though it seems to be a fixed, there must be a loose connection, or maybe I can just touch up by heating each pin of the 5 pins on the CRT here. It's got to be a loose connection in there somewhere. So although I do have filament glow now, it's not showing any indications on here of emission or anything, so I'm thinking maybe the grid or the cathode is loose as well. So I will keep at it and we'll see how it goes. I carefully heated up each pin with a soldering iron and fed a little bit of solder into the end, so I hope it'll make better contact now. Yeah, definitely got a filament glow now. Hard to see though. There it is. Yeah, I'm starting to see flickers of life on the neon indicators. And well, the emission's pretty darn weak, but this tube hasn't been running a long time, so I'll let this cook for a while, and hopefully that will improve. I've had it running about half an hour, and the emissions have improved. Not great, still in the bad range here, but hopefully that will improve a bit more over time. And even at that, that should be enough to produce some sort of image. So I'm going to move on to pulling out the chassis. There's a metal tray underneath the chassis, and that seems to be attached by several screws underneath the cabinet here, so I'll have to grab a 1/4-inch nut driver and see if I can get those out. Turns out there were only 2 screws holding that chassis, and there should have been 6, 3 on each side. See the holes form there. That's so often the case. Servicemen were notoriously bad at putting the screws back in sets. Alright, so here's the inside of the cabinet. Looks to be in pretty good shape. Got bug holes on the inside too. But otherwise it's pretty sound structurally. Let's see if I can get this Weighs a heck of a lot less now too, so it'll be much easier to work on it. Probably weighs about 35 pounds or so. I'll take that speaker off, and I'm going to flip this thing upside down too, because I bet there's metal pads underneath here, and those will really scratch up my floor, so I want to put felt pads down there. And here is the chassis. Overall, not too bad, from what I can see on the top anyways. Just a little bit of rust here and there, but nothing too bad. It's a broken off capacitor. Resistor's got to go. These old sand resistors are just horrible. It's like a piece of ceramic, and then they would wind wire around it, and that wire is always corroded on these. Eventually they just go open. They get so corroded. There's the front of the picture too. Could use a bit of cleaning. It's a metal band holding it in place, unlike the Admirals I've done recently that had cloth. This is used to be copper, or at least copper plated steel. The rubber mounts under here are just completely rock hard. I'll replace all that with some new stuff. It's probably the audio output transformer. And here's the cable that went to that speaker with the field coil. So let's see. It looks like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the potential tubes. All the rest are gone, but I do have spares on hand. Alright, I will now attempt to flip this thing on its side and remove this bottom plate, and let's see what's underneath.